Hello. Today we are going to discuss the very first mitzvah of the Taryag that Chinuch has counted. It is the mitzvah of Peru, Urevu, multiply and be fruitful, or rather be fruitful and multiply. There are three questions I would like to elaborate today, and the first one is actually the one that describes this mitzvah as an obligation. And theoretically, when you look in the text, the actual pshat in the posuk, there is nothing in the posuk that actually alludes to the fact that it should be considered an obligation. Rather, it was a blessing that Hashem gave to the humanity that it should multiply. This is a very important element because indeed in the Taryag mitzvahs, reshuyos, brochos, or avtochos do not have a place in the Taryag. This is one of the klolim of the Rambam, where he says that the mitzvah that is shelilos, which means that it is not an obligation, it is not a loisase, it is not forbidden, but rather an avtocha that it will not exist, or that is an avtocha that it will exist, should not be counted in the Taryag mitzvahs. An example for that he gives the Rambam, there also the idea behind that it is an avtocha and not a loisase, although the other Rishonim disagree with the Rambam on that one. There is another one which the Rambam does not mention, but which we know, and this is the Lo Yosu Shevet Mi Yehuda. This is a brocha that Yaakov gave to his son Yehuda in order to make sure that nobody else should take over the Melucha, and therefore Chazal were rather unpleasant with the Hashmonaim because they were from Shevet Levi after already the kingdom of David HaMelech started off, and therefore it was not supposed to change. Now, we see here the issue of why is it counted in the Taryag mitzvahs, although there is a clear rule by the Rambam that it should not be counted. And so the answer here is very clear, that the reason why it is counted is simply because the Chazal are telling us that it is. So not because of the text in the Torah, but simply because Chazal are telling us that there is an obligation to have children. And since this obligation is based on the Posuk, then the Rambam will always count it in the Taryag mitzvahs. So if Chazal are telling us it is clearly a mitzvah in the Torah, and there is a text in the Torah in which the Rambam and the Chazal are basing themselves, in that case it is also to be counted in the Taryag. That's a very important rule. We will see that multiple times in Chazal and in the Rambam's Taryag mitzvahs, how even though it is not clearly an obligation in the Torah, it is still counted as a mitzvah aseh in the Taryag. Now, the second question I would like to discuss is why is it counted as one mitzvah? It should be counted as two. There are actually in the same mitzvah's name, you have two verbs. One of them is Peru and the other one is Urevu, be fruitful and multiply. The idea behind that is everybody would say, well, it's actually the same thing. It's just Peru means to get married and to have intercourse so that you can have Urevu. So one is just a preparation for the second, but it is not really like that. Because when you are really translating the word be fruitful, in that case you will see that it has a very, very clear understanding of that one should not castrate himself. So that, in other words, not to make sure that his body should not be in such a way that it cannot have children anymore. And this is not to be what we call to be mesares oneself. Sirus is a loisase in the Torah, and in theoretically one could have said that the Peru is the assay of that when somebody does castrate himself, then he would be transgressing not only the loisase but also the assay. And the Rambam always says when there is a loisase and there is an assay, then we count both mitzvahs as two separate mitzvahs in the Taryag mitzvahs. So why is it not counted in as a castration? Actually, we do see another list of mitzvahs where this doubling has occurred. Namely, the Rama Mipano has given us a list of 30 mitzvahs that the Bnei Noach are obligated to keep. The 7 mitzvahs that we know is just a list of mitzvahs where the Bnei Noach, if they transgress, they are neherogim alehem. So there is a misa that they will receive if they transgress those mitzvahs. But there are multiple more mitzvahs that the Bnei Noach has to keep, but there will be no misa for them. And Chazal tell us that there are 30 mitzvahs. So which are those 30? Chazal don't tell us. The Rama Mipano, he gave us a list that he himself has composed. And in this list, he gives indeed the two mitzvahs, Peru as one mitzvah and Urevu as a second mitzvah. And after that mitzvah, he counts sirus of the human beings, the sirus of animals, even the klei hakerem, klei ilonois, kleim by animals. These are all elements of loisases that are followed by the mitzvah of Peru, Urevu. So we have here, interestingly, a lot of good arguments that actually Urevu should be split into two separate mitzvahs. So the only speculation that I can have on the reason why it is not split into separate mitzvahs is because Chazal didn't do it themselves. If Chazal don't do it, then why should we do it? In other words, since in Chazal it is mentioned as one mitzvah, not mitzvos, it is always used in the lotion of singular form. So the Rambam understood from here that this mitzvah has to be counted as one and not as two. The third question is a rather mathematical question, is if the mitzvah is urevu umilu es oretz, if the mitzvah is to multiply and to fulfill the whole world, to populate the whole world, in that case, mathematically, one should only be able to stop at least 3 children and not 2. If you only have 2 children, and you are parents that have only 2 children, and then you stop after 2 children, you will have an increase in the beginning, but at some point you will have what we call a stagnation and a stabilization of the population in the world. If you really want the world to be populated, to increase the population, in that case you must obligate parents to have at least 3 children. And we see in the Mishnah that it is enough to have 2 children. So the answer for that is actually quite a simple one, but it's something that you will probably have to think about it a bit longer. But the condition, the fact that there is a condition that you need to have either 2 boys or 2 girls, or a mix of boy and a girl, as Beis Hillel are holding. Beis Shammai holds that it has to be 2 boys, and Beis Hillel holds that it has to be a boy and a girl. The fact that there are these type of conditions means, in other words, that a person that has 2 children but do not fit this condition will have to continue and have more children than just 2. So in other words, the minimum that each person will strive for will be 2 children, but if a person will have only, for example, 2 boys or only 2 girls as the first 2 children, then in that case he will have to continue and having an extra child, and hopefully it will be the right one, but if not, then he will have to keep on going and going and going. So there is a chance that by obligation a person will have to have at least 5, 6, 7 children in order to come to the obligation. For example, in a case where he starts off with a girl and then another girl and then another girl and then another girl, he is mechuyev to continue until he has another boy, and in that case he can stop. That makes that in any case, by definition and by mathematical evidence, you will always have more than 2 children in order to be able to fulfill the mitzvah. That makes you that eventually you will have growth in the population in any case. So yes, it's true that with 2 children only you will not have fulfilled the mitzvah, but since there is a specific condition that is obligating you to have a particular pattern in the mitzvah, you will have to continue having children in order to find the pattern back that Chazal are obligating you to have. And this will force you that on an average scale, on a statistical scale, you will have a multiplication in the world. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe or at least give it a like. You can of course share this video with the rest, and we will be going soon to the next mitzvah, which is the mitzvah of Bris Mila, which will also be a lot of discussions points that we will have in inclusion of that mitzvah in the Taryag mitzvahs. Thank you very much, and bye.